Business Growth Talks podcast is created and hosted by Mark Hayward. In this show, we talk about how to grow a business in the growth stage. The growth stage is often marked by rapid developments, increased revenue, and an escalating customer base. In each episode, we talk to entrepreneurs and business owners who have grown businesses, and we cover topics like scaling processes, market expansion, financial management, human resource and talent development, and customer retention. If you are looking for actionable advice, tips, and techniques on how to grow, run and build your business, this is the podcast for you.
Today we have Paul Kirch, who is an experienced entrepreneur and leader. Paul is the CEO of Sellience, which is a marketing company which centers around building a unique approach to marketing around leveraging the emotions of its buyers. Paul is also the founder of Paul Kirch, which helps clients emotionally attract buyers through their brand. Paul is also, how I know him, is also the founder of Boss Academy, which is an entrepreneurial think tank community. It's a supportive community where he has speakers talking to the group about different aspects of business and life. Paul has been recognized as a top 10 business podcaster, a former on-air radio personality, and an innovator of the year with Gallup organization. Paul is based in Texas, and so we're pleased to have him on the show. Firstly, just if anyone is looking to subscribe, we are on all podcast platforms, so please do hit the subscribe button. But over to Paul. Thank you, Paul. Thank you for joining us today. How are you?
Oh, Mark, it's a privilege to be here. This is long overdue, so thank you.
Absolutely long overdue. Thank you so much for joining me. We're going to talk about your businesses and go through those and really talk about how you've been growing those businesses and the strategies that you're doing to actually make those business grow. So thank you for joining me. The question which we ask is, what does a business mindset mean to you?
That's really interesting. So I started my first company in 2009, not really feeling like I was qualified to run a business. I grew up in a small town in Nebraska. My dad was a teacher. My mom stayed home, but we lived on a small farm. We ran a vegetable farm in the summer, but it wasn't a very good example of an entrepreneurial business. And so when I went to college, I always dreamed of starting my own company, but I started working for the Gallup organization and got a great job there. And the more I moved up, the more I felt like business ownership was a path that just didn't make sense. So when I got a little further along at Gallup, I decided I wanted to move into sales because I thought sales was the most entrepreneurial role I could have and still have that security of a paycheck. So fast forward, when I did start my first company, I had this really interesting corporate background, sales leadership, sales, outside sales. And so when I first started my first company, I thought, oh man, I'm fully prepared for this. But I wasn't. And I surrounded myself created my own board of directors. It wasn't really a formalized board of directors, but I reached out to some people I knew and said, hey, I really don't know what I'm doing. I want to be successful. Would you be willing to serve on a board and advise me, and I'll, be non-invasive with it? And so I ended up getting 9 people that agreed to just informally be on this advisory board. And they instilled in me just amazing ideas and concepts. So for me, a successful business mindset is realizing you can't do it on your own. We all have experience and backgrounds that make us who we are and get us where we are. But in the end, this is a journey that requires having a sounding board, having people that you can bounce ideas off of, people you can trust. And I think we've all experienced trust that's been betrayed at times. I had a business partner that things didn't go well. But in the end, where I've been most successful is when I've surrounded myself with other leaders who inspire me to do more and push me harder. Because when we see what other people are doing, we see what's possible, and then we can follow in their steps.
Really good answer. Really good answer. I will come back to the advisory board section of Sellience that you.
I do accept gold stars too for any good answers, Mark. So just letting you know.
You'll get plenty of gold stars, I'm sure. I want to just touch on the sales roles that you took on. You said you thought it would be the most entrepreneurial place, but a lot of people, entrepreneurs that I've spoken to on this show, often refer back to sales roles, early sales roles that they've had. And I've created this idea, this thought process when I'm talking to people, that it adds a great deal of resilience because you'll have the phone slammed down on you, the door shut, the whole spiel, and you have to then get up and knock
Yeah.
on the door or make the phone call again. What do you think sales roles have aided you well in your future businesses that you've run?
Well, 100%. And I will tell you that when I first started Gallup, my first couple of years was doing telephone surveys, calling people at home. And then I also did B2B, where we would call doctors and people in businesses and do surveys with them. I learned rejection the hard way early on. And it got to the point where he almost made a game of it. I worked with this guy that if anybody ever hung up on him on a survey, he'd call him back. He had this deep booming voice. His name is this guy, Scott, and he had this really powerful voice. And he said, "Ma'am, this is Scott Brown from the Gallup organization. Why you hang up on me?" And they would always finish the survey with him. And I thought, man, that's so bold. And so I started doing that. And I took rejection and turned it into a game. I almost made it, can I convert this person? It didn't always work, but when it did, it was like there was a sense of accomplishment that wouldn't have happened if it had just been easy. So when I went into sales, I think that really helped lay the groundwork. Now, not all sales roles are the same. Some people get into positions where it's spoon-fed leads, and maybe they have less of a challenge than others. I was doing outside sales where rejection was real. But if you went in prepared and I always think back to a story, and I hope that's okay if I kind of divert, but there was a person in Colorado who I wanted to work with, and they called me and they said, "Hey, look, we're meeting with our team, and we'd like to have you come in and present to us because we really want to work with your company." At the time, I was working with a pretty well-known market research company. And so I said, sure. So I scheduled a bunch of meetings around that area. So I spent a couple of days in Denver, and then I went and met with them. And the guy pulls me into a room, and I was expecting to see 4 or 5 people. There must have been 50 people in this room. And the president of the company was in there. And so I was like, okay, this is definitely not what I was expecting. So I do a presentation about what I thought they needed to hear. I was deaf by PowerPoint probably. But at the end, everyone looked at the president of the company, and he goes, "Oh, this has been great, but I think we're happy with our current supplier." And he started to get up, and I said, "Let me ask you a question. You said you're happy with your current supplier. I get that. I think that's wonderful. But you asked me in for a reason. You took an hour out of your time today. Your team spent a lot of time preparing to have me come in. It's a lot of investment of time when you're happy with your current supplier. So clearly you were missing something. You were looking something. What was it that you were missing?" And all of a sudden he opened up and he started telling me where his frustrations were with the current supplier. Turns out they weren't happy. And so it opened the door that would have normally been closed. And I think that's the stuff that rejection, that idea of turning rejection into a game, it prepared me for that moment. And it was a defining moment for my sales career.
And just before you told the story, I was just going to ask you about overcoming objections and rejections. How do you do that? And I think you've just described that brilliantly there. But do you think the sales role led you into entrepreneurship? Because you started Sellience in 2009. And I was just wondering, like, you've done the sales role, you've been successful. What made you think that the next step was setting up your own business?
Well, it's like I said, I'd always wanted to start a company, and it was an idea that never left me. And I was part of a small corporation when I was still working at Gallup that it just never went anywhere. We ended up selling out the company after a year. So that was my first endeavor that I thought was going to turn into something really entrepreneurial, and it just didn't.
Why did that fail? Why did that one?
Bad timing. It was at the tail end of the .com era, and we got in thinking we started a web development company, and it was just bad timing. At the time, there was a lot of those businesses cropping up, and one of our clients ended up buying out the firm from us. So it ended up being okay, but it wasn't an endeavor that really manifested too much. So when I went into my first entrepreneurial role, it's a long story, and I'll try and just tell the short version of it. I was married to my ex-wife at the time, and we were working for the same company. She was running operations, and I was running sales. And at the time, we loved the company we worked with. Sunday nights rolled around. We couldn't wait to get in the next day. We'd talk about what we were going to do, and it was exciting. I was traveling a lot. It was a lot of fun. And the owner was talking to us about taking over the company. He offered us equity stake, although he kept saying, well, the lawyer's working on the paperwork. It never manifested. And it's like he kept dragging it out. But we trusted him because my ex-wife was best friends with him. And so when that job was just at its peak and we were having a lot of success, we had a lot of growth, he calls us when we're on a trip one time and he says, hey, good news, I'm selling the company. I said, this isn't good news. So we really were thrown for a loop because we thought we were going to be able to take over the company and this was going to be our dream situation. It ended up being anything but. And the company that acquired us was a European company that just had a different mindset. They were more micromanagement in terms of the way they managed things. I stayed on board for the longest time, but I really hated it. My wife at the time was several months pregnant. And I finally said, you know what, I've got to get out of here. So I negotiated out of my contract and left, not really knowing what I was going to do. I had a great reputation in the research industry, although I had a non-compete that I had to contend with. But I was getting job offers. I had like 3 job offers that I turned down. And my wife goes, you either need to take one of these jobs or you're going to have to start this company you've always been talking about. I thought she was really risk averse. I never dreamt she'd be supportive of it, but at the time, it's what I wanted to do. So I always jokingly say that she put her size 6 shoe on my backside and pushed me off the cliff. But it really was, I needed that thumbs up to say, yeah, it's time. And Mark, at the time, the reason I was turning those job offers down is there was something that happened in that moment, the way that we were treated by this new company, and the way that the rug was pulled out from underneath us. I couldn't stomach the idea of going back to work for someone else. So for me, it was almost like I didn't have a choice but to do it. So sales prepared me because my first clients were doing exactly what I was doing. At the time, I'd moved out of outside sales into sales leadership. I was managing teams. I was training people. And so I just started doing sales coaching and consulting, and it was like an easy segue. So your easy answer or your easy question led to a complex answer that for me, sales was the catalyst, it was the training, and it was also the easy segue because that's the business I started.
Amazing. So let's fast forward from 2009. What's the current company structure with your employees at Sellience?
Yeah, so originally it was a sales consulting agency, and I kept getting questions asking if we could also support marketing. And so we moved more and more towards marketing, and then back in about 2014, it became primarily a marketing agency. So today I pretty much manage all of the sales and all the operations oversight. And then I've got an operations manager and we've got a team of tech developers. But most of the sales falls on my shoulders. Small team, but on a growth path.
You're still doing sales calls and sort of,
I am.
Or
yeah.
You're managing a team that's doing the sales calls?
No, I do most of the sales outreach. We have a team that's working on some sales outreach, like more lead generation and cold calling type of thing. But almost all the sales activity, once it gets to a certain point, comes on my plate, which is a lot to manage.
Which is one of the problems most entrepreneurs have, are you a bottleneck?
100%. But it's I won't say necessary evil, but it's where we are right now. We're not at a place where we can expand and bring on a sales team. And quite frankly, I'm good at closing the business, but I don't really have to do much else other than the selling and just overseeing the company in terms of some of the administrative oversight and the operations oversight. But really, I've got a team that I can pretty much hand that off to.
I'm just thinking, because my business partner, George McGarren, still does quite a lot of sales calls himself. Just one of the reasons is he loves the process. He loves the enjoyment of the game of sales. Do you think that your conversion rate is higher than a hungry 22-year-old just out of university that wants to do sales? Do you think with your experience and your knowledge and like training sales teams, do you think your conversion rate is substantially higher than maybe a 22-year-old?
It would probably depend on their level of experience and where they were sourcing their leads. But once a opportunity gets to a point where we're having a serious conversation about it closing, it's like I close a lot of the business. So I'd argue that, yeah, it's pretty high generally.
Good.
We need more at bats, but that's true of most companies. If we get more people to that stage, then closing them is typically not an issue. Because I think there's a level of trust that comes, and the feedback I get from people is that they trust me and they think I'm genuine. And that, I think, is worth its weight in gold. So I had a program years ago that I created, Mark, that was called the ABEs of selling, and it was always be engaging. The old school, always be closing. Yeah, you have to close. There's no question. But the hard closing, the fear mongering that used to take place in the sales world, it alienates people today. And if you're engaging, being honest, being ethical, and really caring about the people you talk to, and I think that's one of the things that's been a huge asset to me is I like people, and the people I work with, I think, know that I genuinely am there to build a relationship as well as be their salesperson and be the person they work with. So I'm not in it just to make a dime, and I think that's important.
I think, from my experience of being part of Boss Academy, I would say one of your strengths is that you genuinely care. You generally care about everyone that's in your community.
Yeah.
And I think that's evident from everyone that I speak to that's part of Boss Academy, is that is definitely something that you do beyond what most people do. But I wanted to just touch on that idea of hard closing, and that whole idea. We definitely have changed as consumers looking to be sold to. We're a bit more savvy and a bit more mature to understand people's sales approaches. It's a lot more evident. It's like, even to the thing of when you're looking at films and things like that, which have all been, I'm thinking the film with Bamford, the Wolf of Wall Street, where
Wolf of Wall Street, yeah,
like hardcore selling. But how do you approach the market now in a mature sort of savvy marketplace versus what you might have done maybe 20 or 30 years ago?
Probably not different enough, because I feel like I was always the same way. It's like I was genuine with people then, and I am now today, but there's certain things that I don't do. There was a phrase that we used to use that worked really well. And if you were asking questions, I'm a huge proponent of salespeople need to learn to ask questions. I actually have a ebook that I created that's called Askology, and it's around the idea of what types of questions should you be asking. But one of the questions that used to work extremely well that doesn't work today the way that it once did is, so what keeps you up at night? Because when you ask somebody that question, it's not about, what savings are they going to get when they buy from you? What features and benefits do they want? You're asking the question, it's like, so you're stressed out. You're having sleepless nights. What's keeping you up at night? What's forcing you on the weekend to really be stressed about your business? So depending on the level of person you're talking to, if you're talking to the owner, which normally I was working with C-suite or owners when I could, that question used to really be impactful. Now you have to approach it differently, because if you ask that question, it's a question that's become so widely used that most people recognize it, and they're going, it's another sales approach. But if you ask the right questions and start to get to understand what struggles are really having, and it's amazing what you can do to provide solutions and provide hope for that. I'm a huge proponent on emotional connections when it comes to marketing and sales. It's like, so how do you connect with people on an emotional level? You start to understand what excites them, what are their worries, what are their stressors. And then if you can get to some of those things, then you can provide solutions. It's not about manipulating. It's about understanding.
100% agree. What's your view on risk tolerance now?
That's funny. I'm at a point in my life where I should probably be extremely risk averse, but I do still believe that business requires taking some chances, taking risks, providing new solutions, making the right investments, being willing to go for it. When you've got a situation where you've got an opportunity to close and you don't, those are the ones that are a gut punch. You think about them for days. It's like, oh man, when I had the opportunity, they were asking for it. I've had salespeople that worked for me that have literally talked people out of buying. because somebody says, yeah, I really need this. And then they start telling them why it's such a great product. And at that point, the person on the other side starts thinking about, well, maybe I can wait. So it's like, you got to take advantage of those opportunities. So I think being risk averse is a dangerous practice when you're a small business owner. It's important to a point because you need to be conservative with your cash flow and things like that. But you have to be willing to take some risks.
I think it's the essence of entrepreneurship. And that's why people who start businesses, they need to have an element of being able to take risks, because you're taking the risks on your shoulders, aren't you? Of
100%. Yeah.
You're not having the guaranteed salary. You're making successes and sort of sales through you or through your team. And I think it's the essence of entrepreneurship. So I think that's what differentiates people from entrepreneurship to wanting just a more safe salaried role. I'm just thinking while I've been talking to you, you said right at the start that you always wanted to be an entrepreneur and you always wanted to own your own business. Can we just flip all the way back? Because it's been running around in my head while I've been talking to you. Why did you want to start that business? You had a good job in market research in Gallup, and you ended in their sales area. What was that thing that kept on nagging you that you should start your own business?
Well, I grew up in a town of 365 people, Mark. We didn't have a lot of opportunity. There weren't really entrepreneurial examples. Anybody that owned a business probably struggled. The people that were successful were ranchers and farmers. But I had an aunt and uncle that I really looked up to that owned a farmer ranch supply business. And prior to that, my uncle owned a jewelry store and some other businesses. He was very successful. And they lived a lifestyle different than we did. You know, I grew up in this small farm and old farmhouse, and we drove an old beat up truck on the farm. And so my aunt and uncle lived this different lifestyle that I really admired. And I loved the way that they talked about business, and it was exciting. So from a very early age, I was very inspired. Every time I was around them, I was like, yeah, I want this. And so I think that just became something that became part of me. And it was something that I always aspired to. And I wish I was wired differently at times, because when I was in the corporate world, I had a lot of success. And I got Innovator of the Year at Gallup and a bunch of different awards and accolades, and I kept rising up. But I never really felt fulfilled. And there was a part of me that felt I was missing out. The grass is always greener. Being an entrepreneur is probably one of the hardest things I've ever done, being a business owner, but it's also one of the most rewarding. And that fulfillment is something that at the time I didn't have, and I wish I would have been just complacent and happy, because it would have been an easier path. But I'm really grateful for the path I went down.
Amazing. Thank you.
We'll be back after a quick break.
If you're an online business owner and you want to learn what's working right now to generate leads, grow your following, and get paying clients and customers, then be sure to check out the Digital Trailblazer podcast. Each week, we feature online business owners just like you who are launching and scaling their businesses, and we reveal exactly what they're doing to rise above the competition to build a successful, profitable online business. And what's really unique about the Digital Trailblazer podcast is that you're going to learn these strategies directly from the business owners who are putting them into action and getting results. So head over to the Digital Trailblazer podcast. You can find us on all the major podcasting platforms, or just head over to digitaltrailblazer.com for links to all of our episodes.
Thank you for telling me about that. So how we met was in your community, your think tank community is how you've described it. It's called Boss Academy. So for the audience, why don't you just tell us a little bit more about what Boss Academy is and who you're trying to serve?
Well, I hope you don't mind if I tell the origin of that as well. So I had this sales agency that turned into a marketing agency. And so I was gaining a lot of experience from both sides. And we were bringing a lot of sales strategy into the marketing, it shouldn't be in contrast, but it is in contrast. And you look at the definition of marketing in the dictionary, and everything about marketing is sales oriented. But yet in organizations, there's this major disconnect between sales and marketing. They should work together, but they sometimes don't. And marketing's doing this and sales isn't doing this. So I had all these different things that were building this level of experience. And so I went to this networking event, And it was hosted by a pretty large web provider that was hosting these summits around the country here in the States. And I thought, it's going to be another sales pitch. I almost didn't go, but I'm glad I went. There was about 70 people in the room, and the speaker was talking, and she was talking about different marketing strategies. And during the Q&A, a couple of people were asking questions, and she talked right over the head of the audience members. Like, she was talking from high level, and most of them were small business owners, mom and pop shops. They didn't really have that level of marketing experience. So I raised my hand and said, I don't have a question, but I said, you answer this gentleman's question over here, but I think he still is a little bit confused. Do you mind if I provide some perspective? And she goes, no, please. I love that. That's what we do. And so I gave him some ideas and talked about some tools I used. And then next thing I know, there's a couple people in the audience asking me questions, and the speaker was like, oh, please, we love this. We love this. And so it was great. So after that event, this woman approached me. Without exaggeration, about 70 people in the room, probably half of them either came up and gave me business cards or asked for my business card, which was very flattering. And this woman, she goes, hey, do you have a card on you? I said, absolutely. And she goes, well, I'm so-and-so, the general manager of a radio station over in Dallas. And she goes, I loved what you had to say. And she goes, I'm going to see if you're interested about getting you on a couple of our shows as a guest. I said, I'd love that. And so about a week later, she calls me and she goes, hey, we were looking you up and talking about your experience and how you handled yourself. Would you want your own radio show? And so I had this idea for a show that was called Boss Academy. And I said, will I own the rights? And she said, absolutely. So I went over and met her. They offered me a drive time show on Monday nights. And so I started hosting this show called Boss Academy Radio. And I loved it. It was so much fun. Doing live radio was a blast. But most of my clients were in other markets, New York, California, Florida. And so after a year of doing the radio show, I decided to move to podcasting. They offered to syndicate my show, but it was going to be expensive and it was going to be an undertaking. So I thought podcasting made more sense. So in 2017, after running the show for a couple of years, I ended up on a top 10 list, and it was successful by all rights. At the time, I was going through a pretty tragic divorce, sadly. My ex-wife and it definitely was a challenging situation. I walked out of that marriage feeling pretty broken, and I became a single father overnight. And so I decided I can't keep going with the show. I was doing 3 episodes a week and doing a Friday video recap. It was a lot of work. And I always tell people that one of the lessons I learned from that is I was doing 3 episodes a week, Friday video recap, and then I went to doing 1 episode a week, 1 episode every other week, 1 episode when I felt like it, and I started losing followers like crazy. Markets, like, they go away very quickly, and they don't come back when you go back to that schedule because you've set an expectation for them. And so I just was feeling really stressed and depressed in a lot of ways. And so I decided I'm going to put the show on hold for a while, and then maybe I'll bring it back when I'm in a better mind frame. And then fast forward a couple of years, the pandemic hits in 2020, and I'm like, I just don't want to go back to podcasting, but I really kept being called to bring this Boss Academy brand back. And I'd always wanted to build Boss Academy into an online community. And I thought, man, when have I really benefited the most? Like I told you earlier, is my board of advisors and then masterminds. And so a lot of these times when I was around other people was when I was most driven and motivated and successful. And so I said, I'm going to create my own. So I started hosting a Friday call with a partner at the time, and he's no longer involved, but we started hosting this Friday call, and 3 people show up, 5 people show up, and then it started to grow. And they kept coming every week. And I'm thinking, is this working? Is this working? And then next thing I know, I'm starting getting this feedback. Oh, we're working together. I'm collaborating with so-and-so. Oh man, gosh, what we talked about last week really changed my business. I started to see what was coming from this. So there's this massive community of growth and opportunity, and meeting people like you and all these different perspectives. And we're all really about supporting each other. And so Boss Academy today I call it a think tank because it's not really a mastermind group, but on our Friday calls, we dive in deep on different topics. We have speakers that come in from time to time on different topics. Every week, there's something you can take away and use in your business to grow it. And then we accumulated a bunch of resources. We've got our own on-demand video content platform. So for me, Boss Academy isn't just something that's been fun to do and meet some new people. It's something that it's like I'd be afraid to stop Boss Academy tomorrow because it's been so valuable to my business. And I know that many of the members say the same thing.
I would say out of all of the networking masterminds, and some are like, we pay a lot of money for these masterminds. I've been on property ones, on business ones, but I would say that your community that you've created there is probably the most supportive group. People taking time out to have one-to-ones, people doing really lovely stuff on LinkedIn and sharing, which is always important on LinkedIn. I really feel that the people that are in the community now, they want everyone to win. It's not like I'm going to take everything I can suck out of this group and then do the best. They're actually incredibly supportive for everyone's businesses to be able to grow. And that whole win mentality, I would say, is probably the best attribute that you've got as that group.
I appreciate that. And I love hearing that. And I think it's true. I don't want to pat myself on the back, but from the beginning, I really established the mindset that this was meant to help. So it was meant to help everybody. When Boss Academy Radio, the show was on, BOSS stood for Business Ownership Success Strategies. And on the radio show, I would always say tips, tools, strategies, and insights to take your business to the next level. But I really meant it. And every episode was, you were going to get business ownership success strategies. I dove deep on all those interviews. The one complaint I had about the show was there's sometimes too many takeaways. It's like, where do I implement? What do I leverage? A good problem to have. So when I created the community, I want to bring that same mindset forward. And so when I started recruiting people to join, that was a established mindset that I had. And I will tell you, the people that have stayed and that are really active, I think share that mindset. And it becomes a little bit of addictive helping each other, because I know that if I help you, you're going to help me.
Yeah. Do you think it's scalable?
In its current form, it can only scale to a certain point. Membership right now could grow. Maybe I could triple the membership from where it is, and it would be fine. But the dynamic of what makes Boss Academy work is this intimate setting, and it's the people that are collaborating and helping each other. But I do have strategies that are coming forward that are going to help it grow. We're about to launch a marketplace, which will be a super scalable model. And that means that Mark Hayward can not only have his presence on Boss Academy, but he can also promote his business, sell his services through there, and then everybody wins. So yeah, it is scalable, but not in the current form that you're seeing, but where it's going, absolutely. And I still always want to keep that Friday call meant to be a place where it's a smaller group that just is really focused on serving each other.
And what about customer retention? So the people that I've seen on your group have all renewed, but I'm assuming some people have dropped off after a year. I would imagine after 1 year, some people do. What's the sort of strategy for you to keep your clients renewing every year?
Well, I will tell you that there's not been a single person that's dropped out because they were unhappy. They dropped out because they didn't feel like they could afford to continue paying the subscription because their business had taken a hit. And I started this to really make a difference and help. So I've been able to work with some of those people to provide them a way of staying still involved. It's a win scenario. So there's been very little loss, but there is natural attrition in any networking group, whether they drop out of membership, but they maybe stop coming because they've got client engagements to get in the way. So one of the things I do is I'm constantly reaching out to people, making sure, hey, what can I do to help make this a benefit to you? So I think it's that personal connection. And then I've got people that are part of the community that they're very supportive, and they're doing that same outreach. If they know somebody's struggling, they're reaching out to see how they can help them. Linda Swindling, she's an amazing soul. She's an incredible negotiation expert, but she's taken a couple of people under her wing that were at a point where their business wasn't quite where it was sustainable. They were struggling to really make ends meet. And so she was helping guide them, advise them, and she's made a huge impact in their lives. So I think that's part of it, just that personal connection. And that's what, if it grows too much, that's going to be harder to maintain. So it's important that there's a balance.
And I'm not trying to like sort of promote myself, but you reached out to me, was it last week that we had a call and we talked about my business and you were talking about the marketplace and we talked about your business. And I genuinely said at the end of that call, look, why don't we have another call in a month? Just spitball ideas about Boss Academy or something like that. So I've actually put some time in later on this month and I think this is a credit to you. I want Boss Academy and you to be successful. I'm not saying I will have the answers per se to the scenarios or the problems or the pain points that you've got at the moment, but because of what your community has gifted me, I'm looking to help you. And there might be just having that sort of sounding point. You said like your board of directors at Sellience and mastermind groups. I really do think that whole sort of idea of having space with, sometimes you need your business partners, you need your board of advisors here, but sometimes you need someone who's outside of that to give a perspective that you don't currently have because you're in the business. I always find that when I'm doing things, you're in the business and it's sometimes hard to sort of zoom out and see the whole picture. So I think that's a credit to you that I thought, let's have another call. And it might add very little value, I don't know, but it might just come up with something that you've not thought about. So I think that is the critical element of the group, which is, and you've described other people doing that for other people in the group. And I think that is really where the difficulty comes when you're talking about scaling, because you talk about scaling, you talk about a marketplace, you talk about videos that you can then sell as packages and things like that. But the essence of what that group has been for so many people is, especially through COVID and difficult times like that, space to actually share ideas or share difficulties or pain points or what's keeping them up at night is been the bedrock for a lot of people. And that's why you have the customer retention that you do have.
Yeah, and I appreciate that. And look, Mark, I'm talking to you again because I know that whatever you tell me, I'm just going to do the opposite and I'll be in great shape. I'm teasing, of course. Teasing. No, I love it. But ultimately, here's the thing. If you and I talk, so I've met people that are afraid to make recommendations or introductions because they don't want it to fall back on them. Oh, if it doesn't go well, it's going to make me look bad. That's such a foolish way of looking at business, in my opinion. I've built a career out of making connections. And even when I was in a sales role, I had a boss that always said, be a resource. And what he meant was not just be resourceful for your clients internally, help them in ways you can. So I went to a sales meeting one time and this guy shows up and I'm excited to meet him. I love the company he was working for. I wanted their business. And he goes, I'll be honest with you, I'm actually job hunting and I was hoping you could help me. And so I was first put off by it, but he handed me his resume and I looked at his resume and I said, I actually know somebody who might really need you. So I introduced him to somebody. They hired him. That guy's been loyal to me for 15 years. And it's like, well, I guess not been 15, about 10 years. But it's that type of stuff that you just have to be willing to put yourself out there. But ultimately, in my business, I have to make the decision. If I talk to Mark Hayward and you give me advice and you say, hey, I think you should turn your logo purple, and I turn my logo purple and all of a sudden purple becomes a symbol of hatred or whatever, I made that choice. I have to own that choice. And that's the difference between getting advice from somebody and then expecting you to make the answers. If I come talk to you at the end of this month and you tell me something and I have to implement it because you say so, well, you better be the one writing the checks and be the one responsible for everything. I'm going to take advice from you. I'm going to listen to you, and then I'm going to make the decision ultimately. And I think that's why it's okay to get advice from outside. And that's why it's okay to bounce ideas off of people. Because sometimes the decision process is hard. And if you say to me, Paul, I think you're making a mistake if you do that, and I don't heed that warning, you're not going to come back to me a year later and say, I told you so. Right. But ultimately I'm going to say, you know what, I should have listened to Mark when I had the chance. But that's why we ultimately have to own our own path.
Quick story before we get into the quick fire questions. A mentor that I worked with when I was in corporate, I worked with him for a number of years, and incredibly successful person in sales and then running his own businesses, hugely successful, great guy to have as a sounding board. But it took me a while because I was a little bit in awe at the start. Shout out to Louis Halpin if he is listening. And I was parrot what he was telling me to do, and it wasn't working. I'm like, why is this not working? And what I ended up finding was the advice was right. It was how he packaged and how he explained what he thought I needed to do. So we were looking at targeting other markets and how I would do that. And it was interpreting the message that he was giving me, which was solid, really like A-star, sort of the gold standard messaging, but putting it into the authenticity of my voice that would then make it convincing to the audience, which was the people I was working with and getting approval for going to different markets and stuff. So I think you're absolutely right. As a business owner, as an entrepreneur, you have to take ownership of your own decisions. Even if you take advice from other people, it is critical that you realize that, as you say, you're signing, you're going out there and doing that sales or doing that strategy. So you have to own it if you're going to take those sorts of pieces of advice.
Yeah, and trust your own gut, because if somebody gives you advice, it could be the most amazing advice, but if it doesn't feel right, you're probably not going to execute it right. That doesn't mean it isn't a good path and you can't make it work. But I had this happen a couple of years ago where I had somebody insisting that I go down this path of creating this offering, and I just didn't feel right about it. And you know what? It didn't work. Not because it wasn't a great idea, but because I was not in the frame of mind to make it work. I didn't trust it.
Look, we're coming to the end of the interview. I wish I could have another hour to talk to you, Paul, but we are coming to the end of the interview. I ask the same 6 questions for all of my guests. They're quick fire questions. They don't need a quick fire answer. First question is, what's the best decision that you've made?
Man, well, I'm going to not talk about business. I'm going to say one of the best decisions I made was, even though I'm divorced, moving to Texas and marrying my ex-wife, because the kids that I have today are just like the greatest blessing in my life. One's a teenager, one's a preteen. It's a hard age, but my life is so much richer because of them. And then I'd say, in addition, my girlfriend Holly, we've been together 5 years. When I met her, deciding to date her was like another great decision that's transformed my life.
What's the best piece of advice you've been given?
Well, I'm going to go back and say, be a resource. Be a resource became like this mantra. I started volunteering at conferences and it got me on board of directors. It allowed me to make connections that I would never have otherwise, because I started being resourceful. I would send advice, or not advice, but news clippings and articles and other things to clients because I thought it would help them. And then I'd find out how much they really, truly appreciate it. Just being resourceful, but also being a resource.
Absolutely. Who's helped you most in your career?
Don't know if I can lay it on one person, but I would say the person that probably gave me the greatest jump start was when I left that company back in 2009 and started my first company. The owner of the company, he just gave me some great advice, and he really wanted to see me be successful, even though I was leaving the company he was a part of. So I'd say that he made a huge impact on how I got started.
And yeah, I think we all have. There's a number of people often that have made.
Yeah.
There's usually one person, and I'm glad you shared that. Tell me about a regret that you have.
I think we all have things that we probably wish had gone differently, but I try not to live with regrets, Mark. It just doesn't really help anybody. Every regret or every bad decision ended up being a lesson learned. That's got me where I am. I'd say that I'm where I'm supposed to be.
Right. Okay. And what are you most proud of?
Well, probably my kids. Ultimately, it comes back to your family and loved ones. And if I was to say in terms of business, I'd say my resilience, because I've learned one thing about myself, Mark, that I've had great years. I've had years that were tough, but I've learned that I have resilience that I never knew I had.
That's so true. That's so true. And I think that we've come a full loop, all from your sales training that gives you that resilience. I think also there's a personality wise, from a resilience point of view, you've got to be able to go through the tough times to have the good times as well. Last question. What does legacy mean to you?
That's what I'm really struggling with, because I feel like I'm in a place where I have so many things that I've accomplished, but I don't really feel like I've got a legacy that will extend beyond my time on earth. So I'm working on that. To me, Boss Academy has the potential to be a legacy model, because I know the people that benefit from it. It's transformed their business. It's transformed their way of thinking. But in terms of legacy for my kids, and I'm working on that. That's something that does. If you were to ask me what keeps me up at night, that's one of those things.
And lastly, if people want to know more about you or find out more details about you, where should they go?
Well, I assume you'll put my LinkedIn information in the show notes, but bossacademy.com is a great place to go, or paulkirch.com. Both of those are great places to get to know me, know about me. And then if you're interested in getting to know me better, I'd encourage you to reach out, connect, and I'm happy to support you.
Brilliant. Thank you, Paul. I wish I had another hour. We're going to have to get you back on in a few months' time. It's an absolute pleasure. Every time I spend time with you, I learn something or I gain something. And that whole point of adding value to people's lives, not just their business, just to people's lives as well, I think is a consistent theme throughout what it sounds like your career and your business experience. So thank you so much for your time.
Thanks, Mark. I appreciate it. And you know that I really look forward to our next conversation. I'm happy to be back on anytime.
That'd be brilliant. Thanks, Paul. Have a lovely day. Cheers.
You too.
Wow. Where do I start with this guy, Paul Kirch? Absolute massive fan of this guy. As I said, I've been part of Boss Academy for some time and really wanted to showcase him and his business. I learned things about Sellience, which I didn't know about, and about his past in Gallup, which I'd read about, which shared with me. But this guy is an amazing guy. I've got a lot of time for him. I think the critical thing for me that he said there is adding, like we often say, like adding value to our clients and to people in our lives, but being a resource, being resourceful and being a resource for people actually is a different way of being able to think about these things. And I thought his perspective on that was critical and really important. And I loved him talking about that. His idea of risk tolerance. And I found that really interesting about him saying that his aunt and uncle were his inspiration for his entrepreneurship. Often hardship brings people to own their own business. Sometimes they're let down by the corporate world. But I really felt that he had that entrepreneurial spirit in him, even before he even knew it. And I thought that was incredibly fascinating to hear about that. And I would advise anyone that's interested in getting value to look at Boss Academy as a community that you might want to join. And I thought it was interesting, he said about the scalability of that. And he says he could triple his numbers, and I think he's absolutely right. He could triple his numbers and still add that value. But when you get into that larger scale, when you start doing videos and creating subscription models, things like that, there does lose an element of the connectivity and the touch points, which make Boss Academy such a great vehicle for people to learn, to listen, to understand, to share as well. Sharing is also very important for that group as well. And I think we just literally just scratched the surface. It was quite a condensed interview, unfortunately. But I would say, and it's like the story about him doing his podcast and the radio show. He knows the struggles that a podcaster has, and he knows the struggles that being consistent, and he said on the radio show, showing up, as well as doing the podcast. And I know he's had his dark times as well as his good times. And I think that makes someone a more rounded, a better person, a better soul to be as a contributor, as a supporter, as a person that can add that value or be a resource to people. So look, thank you, Paul, for being a guest on my show. I'm sure we'll bring you back on to talk a little bit more about one of those areas, or maybe a different area. It's been an absolute pleasure knowing you for these couple of years. And hopefully a couple of people see your business in Sellience or see Boss Academy and join, because I would definitely support and promote people to reach out to Paul, even just to have a conversation about it. So thank you, Paul. It's been an absolute pleasure having you on my show, and look forward to the next interview. Thanks a lot, guys.
Thank you for listening to Business Growth Talks. This podcast is released every Monday, so don't miss an episode by subscribing to all podcast platforms, including Apple and Spotify. Have a great day.